The vehicle seen on screen is the Ford F-Series pickup, America's best-selling model for 44 consecutive years. It comes with 3.5-liter V6 or 5-liter V8 engine options, and its fuel tank holds 136 liters. When one of Europe's most popular compact models, the Volkswagen Polo, is placed in the same frame, the picture changes completely. The Polo is a classic city car with tiny dimensions. It comes with 1-liter 3- or 4-cylinder engines, and its fuel tank holds only about 40 liters. When the two vehicles are placed side by side, the resulting size difference is not an exception. It is the rule. The second best-selling model in the US is the Chevrolet Silverado, while in Europe, compact models like the Renault Clio fill the top of the list. Toyota RAV4 sits in third place in the US, while the Volkswagen T-Roc stands out in Europe. The gap repeats in the same way in every comparison. The European market prefers small and compact cars, while Americans lean toward massive vehicles. There are, of course, surface-level explanations behind this difference in preference, such as showing off, wide roads, or parking problems. But the real reason underneath is the economic and political struggle between two large economic blocs in the automotive sector. The story goes back to the 1973 oil crisis. In the past, sedans and station wagons made up roughly 80% of the American market, while SUVs and pickups remained marginal. When the U.S. supported Israel during the Arab-Israeli War, OPEC member countries began an embargo, and the price of oil tripled overnight. Since the U.S. was heavily dependent on foreign oil at the time, it passed a law after this shock, requiring vehicles that consumed less fuel. Under the law, the average fuel consumption of all the vehicles a manufacturer sold in a year had to stay below a certain limit. If the limit was exceeded, the manufacturer was fined. This regulation was different from today's emissions rules, because it was driven entirely by fuel economy, not environmental concern. The law's exemption for models falling under the light truck class was the step that changed the entire balance. The justification was that these vehicles were preferred by farmers and cargo haulers, who needed powerful engines. American automakers quickly spotted this loophole. Rather than developing new, efficient engines from scratch, it was far cheaper to adapt the light trucks they were already producing for everyday use. As a result, models that were both exempt from regulation and powerful enough for family use began to fill the market. In many parts of the world, commercial vehicles receive tax advantages, but in exchange, they usually come with disadvantages, such as mandatory annual inspections or lower speed limits. In the US, the situation is different. Holding a light truck registration carries almost no downside, and it even provides a tax advantage for business owners. The overly broad definition of the class is also the crux of the matter. A vehicle qualifies as a light truck if it has four-wheel drive, sits at a certain height off the ground, exceeds certain length and width values, and has seats that fold flat. This is how luxury SUVs like the BMW X5, Audi Q7, or Porsche Cayenne end up technically classified as light trucks in the US. This broad definition made it almost inevitable that SUVs and pickups would take over the US market. The segment became far more advantageous for both manufacturers and consumers. It is well known that the American automotive lobby has pushed hard to preserve and even expand this regulation. Although the calculation shifted from gallons per mile to carbon emissions in 2016, the US applied this transition differently from Europe. Instead of a single fixed target, a flexible limit was set based on the footprint the vehicle occupies. The larger the vehicle, the looser its carbon emissions rules become. The law therefore indirectly rewards the production of massive vehicles. The effect of this is concrete. Over the years, the Toyota Camry grew by about 21%, the Toyota RAV4 by 34%, and the Ford F-Series by 25%. Of course, legal regulations alone cannot fully explain American consumers' preference for giant vehicles. Cultural codes are also a powerful factor. Owning a big, powerful vehicle is a status symbol for many Americans. Since cities were planned around the automobile from a later stage, roads are wide and parking is plentiful. The fact that interstate distances often exceed 1,000 kilometers, combined with the lack of a developed rail network, makes it far more appealing to cover long journeys in large, comfortable vehicles. More decisive than all these factors, however, is the matter of oil. The U.S. is currently one of the largest oil-producing countries in the world. Because of this, the money spent on fuel for large displacement engines largely circulates back within the country. In Europe, the situation is the opposite. Since the continent is a net oil importer, policymakers prefer to curb consumption by imposing high taxes on fuel. This policy is usually presented under the banner of environmental concern, but the real reason behind it is reducing dependence on foreign oil. As a result, European drivers pay roughly 2.5 times more for fuel than Americans do. There is an interesting concrete illustration of this. The Volkswagen Polo's small tank costs almost the same to fill as the Ford F-Series massive tank, yet the Polo's average consumption stays far below that of the F-Series. The European Union's emissions rules are the crux of the matter. The Union requires that the average carbon emissions of all the vehicles a manufacturer sells stay below a certain limit per kilometer. The current limit stands at around 93.5 grams, and exceeding it results in heavy fines. Unlike the US, this rule grants no exemption based on vehicle class. In fact, even one of Volkswagen's smallest and most efficient engines can emit above this limit. The only way for manufacturers to avoid penalties in this landscape is to add zero-emission electric vehicles to their lineup in order to pull the average down. This shows that Europe's commitment to the shift toward electric vehicles actually stems more from the goal of reducing oil dependence than from environmental concern. These two completely different market logics also put pressure on automakers. As profit margins in the sector narrow, brands try to cut costs by sharing platforms and engines across models. But the American and European markets demand such different types of vehicles that sharing parts becomes nearly impossible. Ford is the clearest example of this duality. While it fits its best-selling US model with a 5-liter V8 engine, its best-selling European model, the Puma, comes with a small 1-liter engine. This deep divergence is why most American brands besides Ford have withdrawn from the European market. In the same way, Europe's best-selling compact models, like the Volkswagen Polo, barely find a foothold in the US market because American consumers do not take vehicles of that size seriously. In the end, the tax and emissions policies set by governments shape production and consumption preferences far more profoundly than cultural factors do. Europe has specialized in low-displacement turbocharged engines because of its strict emissions rules, while America, with the comfort provided by its abundance of oil, has specialized in building massive vehicles. The gap between the Ford F-Series and the Volkswagen Polo is, in the end, nothing more than a reflection of two different legal and economic systems on the automotive industry.